So, I just finished a video game I've been waiting 5 years for. So I think maybe it's probably a good idea to give you guys a little backstory before I talk about my thoughts on Sonic Frontiers. The first Sonic game I ever owned was Sonic Advance, but the first one I ever played was Sonic 2 on a friend's Genesis. The first Sonic game I became absolutely enamored with, however, was Sonic Adventure 2. Battle, because of course it was on a GameCube. Now, this has colored my opinion of the Sonic franchise ever since. Given that the first game with a story I played was Adventure 2, I was introduced to characters like Rouge the Bat, Shadow the Hedgehog, Eggman running around in his mecha, taking a super involved part in the story, and I haven't really gotten a Sonic game that did that, except for the exception of, say, Sonic 06. I'm in that weird camp that feels like Sonic 06 is a broken, middling game with an amazing story. I know that's going to get me a lot of lambasting in the comment section below, but I actually frequently go back and rewatch that story front to finish, just on YouTube every now and again. I mean, it's literally like a 3-hour Sonic Final Fantasy movie. But suffice to say, that means that I absolutely adore very, very meaty Sonic stories. And really, if I'm looking back at all the Sonic games we've had recently, Unleashed had a pretty lengthy, meaty story. 06 did, of course. Adventure 1 and 2 had stories that were really well written and memorable, even if they weren't translated all the best. But outside of those games, we don't have that many good, narratively focused Sonic games. I mean, Sonic Forces looked like it was trying at one point to be that, but, well, there's infinite reasons why that game kind of blew. There were games that brought in incredibly interesting ideas throughout the series, though. I'm not gonna lie, the Deadly Six are still something that I love when the IDW comics return to, because Ian Flynn manages to take those characters and does a really good job with them. Hell, Ian Flynn also managed to take the foundation of Sonic Forces and make a really good comic series based on that being the last major video game event that happened. And I say all that because Ian Flynn is, of course, head of writing for this particular Sonic game. Sonic Frontiers is being headed by the guy who revamped the Archie comics and the guy who headed the IDW comics. He's done such things as making Zavok an interesting character, writing a compelling zombie apocalypse story in the Sonic universe, but if there's one thing that his writing does that I think is very exemplified in this game, it's that it celebrates the series. You see, rather than picking and choosing the best, most iconic moments in the Sonic series, a thing that Ian Flynn seems to be really good at is taking even the bad moments in Sonic and writing them to where they're good. His writing philosophy seems to be very much that if something has happened in established canon, we should recognize it as canon and address it as such. Ignoring bad writing is just ignoring the parts of a story you don't like so that you can keep the story as good as possible, but that in and of itself can be considered bad writing because there are bits and pieces of your foundation that are basically being actively retconned as you go forward. And Ian Flynn, while he does seem to be okay with the occasional retcon in the Sonic series, he also seems to be a stickler for series continuity. The IDW comic, for instance, constantly makes nods to the Black Arms invasion of Shadow the Hedgehog, or the Werehog incident of Sonic Unleashed, and despite us not being able to really place Sonic and the Secret Rings on a timeline anywhere, it does still get referenced in regards to the Metal Virus saga. Basically, there's not a single aspect of this Hedgehog story that Ian doesn't seem to try to fit into the narrative somehow, with, you know, the exception of, like, the Freedom Fighters. Characters that have unfortunately been abandoned because of legal issues with Sega. So when it comes to the story of Frontiers, we'll talk about that here in a bit, but just know I wanted to get this part out there. I really do like Ian Flynn as a writer, and I do like what he manages to do with this game. So now that I've gotten that little footnote out there, one other thing. This is where I bring in the obligatory Sonic had a rough transition into 3D, and Sonic 06 is a video game that we all have to talk about at some point. I know that nobody likes those talking points, but I'm gonna have to bring them up right now anyway. Sonic didn't have a rough transition into 3D. Sonic Adventure was an incredibly celebrated game upon its release. The only rough transitionary title I can think of is Sonic 3D Blast, but that was an isometric game. It's very hard to actually count that. Sonic Adventure 2 also was a likewise celebrated title upon its release, even if it wasn't celebrated as much as the original adventure. Heroes was seen as a more middling experience, but a really good starting ground for the Hedgehog. But in recent years, Sonic hasn't felt so good in 3D. In fact, Sonic Unleashed was an attempt to recreate the character's 3D movement by treating him less like a platforming character and more like a race car. And that really does matter because we've got to talk about the boost formula. A lot of people are split on whether they like Sonic's boost mechanics. It basically replaces the spin dash and just gives you a one-button way to immediately rocket yourself forward, and each game has a different way of handling boost. The Wii version of Unleashed has a boost that is locked behind 30-ring increments of power, whereas the version seen in Colors and Unleashed are a more continuous boost, and they all operate as pseudo-air dashes to supplement the homing attack, as well as being ways to clear out enemies since they are functionally spin dash replacements. But by the time we get to Sonic Forces, the controls seem to start to fall apart. You see, in Sonic Colors, the game seems to think that Sonic is more of a 2D character while touting himself in a 3D game. The controls are still fine and dandy, they're up to the task, and by the time we get to Sonic Generations, there's a more even split between 2D and 3D sections. By the time we get to Sonic Forces, though, it starts feeling like the developers forgot how to make this formula work. A friend of mine on Twitter, Brioche, actually said it was very weird to him that Sonic's boost formula peaked in the very first game that it released in. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. I think Generations controlled a bit better, but all of that is required for context so that we can talk about how Sonic controls in Frontiers. Before we talk about story, level design, anything, we need to talk about how Sonic handles, because again, Sonic as a race car does not make for a good platforming character. So, how did they handle controls in Frontiers? It's a little weird. So there's about 3 different control schemes that happen in Frontiers, and then you can modify them any way you want, with some exceptions. Let's start out with the cyberspace controls, since that is the first area you'll find yourself in the game. The controls here are jank. Think the 2D Sonic controls of Forces, but somehow actually worse. Cyberspace feels like a tech demo Sonic, like a Sonic that is still being figured out, despite the fact that we've been playing with this Sonic since Unleashed. We've had almost 12 years of playing with this iteration of Sonic. We have no reason for this version of the character to not control well. We've been playing with it for so freaking long, and yet somehow cyberspace manages to kill all of our ability to control him. Well, what do I mean by that? So, like I said, Sonic is built to be a race car in the boost formula. As a result of that, Sonic has the ability to drift. Now, the drift ability in Sonic Unleashed, and to a lesser extent Colors and Generations as well, the drift is meant as a way to maintain your flow state throughout any level. Anytime you see a sharp turn, anytime that there is an area that is incredibly wide and expansive, the drift is built to allow you another level of maneuverability in those areas, as well as just looking really cool. Like, let's be honest, Sonic drifting around corners has always been a spectacle ever since we saw it in Unleashed, even on the Wii version. So in Frontiers, when you play in levels that are literally ripped off directly from Sonic Unleashed, when you don't have the drift, you feel like you're playing a tech demo fan-made character that wasn't actually built for these stages. Now, there are other stages that are lifted from various games, but I want to bring note specifically to the stages lifted from Sonic Adventure 2. We have Green Forest, Metal Harbor, City Escape, well, at least a third of City Escape, and even Skyrail, which was a shadow level, all superimposed into Sonic Frontiers. Now, the Sonic Frontiers cyberspace versions of these levels control better than the versions ripped out from Unleashed. It's almost as if the Sonic who was designed to be a platformer character works better when you put him in a level that was designed for a Sonic that's supposed to be a platformer character. But this Sonic is still not quite up to the task of being a really strong platforming character. There was a thing that would happen in earlier Boost games where Sonic would slip a little bit. He felt a little more slippery on the ground. And to be fair, this is an issue that we've had since Heroes and Shadow the Hedgehog. Sonic's ability to platform always seems to be juxtaposed to his ability to go very, very fast, as opposed to the first two adventure games, where if you dropped onto a platform, you basically stood still. In this game, you do stand still. It certainly lends itself better to platforming, but it's really hard to maintain a flow state without the speed controls from earlier games. But the game feels like it's trying so hard to be those speed controls. It's trying so hard to take Sonic as race car and turn him into a platforming character, as opposed to just building him from the ground up to be a platforming character like in the adventure titles. All in all, when I start talking more about the cyberspace levels, you'll see more of what I mean here, but I'm going to go ahead and move on to the controls in the open zone. I said that there were about 3 different control types, and this is where the open zone comes in. So in open zone, you'll find the other 2 control types. There is a version of the 2D controls here that feels as close an approximation to the cyberspace levels as you can get. Yes, there is 2D in the open world, and I don't think it's necessary. It feels very, very awkward to be locked onto a 2D plane in this game, especially when the world is so big. And then the third control scheme, the best control scheme the game has, the actual open zone 3D controls. Now, here is where the game shines. Sonic running around in a giant open landscape with only a few enemies able to get in your way, and even then you can ignore them if you just want to move past them, with the ability to crawl up mountains using the spin dash. This is an ideal framework for Sonic. This is a very good foundation. Now, is it the best possible? No. This is the best Sonic has controlled in a couple of decades in terms of platforming. Not the best he's controlled in terms of speed. I think Unleashed and Generations got that down pretty well, but this is the best he's controlled as a platforming character since the adventure games, and a platforming character that can move several times faster than he does in the adventure games. So that is an achievement. I'm not going to lie. I've played some Sonic fan games in the past, things like Sonic Omens, that have tried to have this more open Sonic running as fast as he can, and those games, for all their merits, do seem to usually have a very, very slippery Sonic, a very Heroes-esque Sonic. This Sonic is, for better or worse, very glued to the ground. And when I say for better or worse, let me go ahead and explain. So, Sonic in this game, when you boost, he stops if you are not holding on to your control stick. That sounds good on paper, because in previous games, especially Sonic Forces, the boost to win idea had been firmly cemented into most people's minds. The idea that you could just hold the boost button down, it eliminated all enemies, it brought all rings to you, and it maintained you going at the highest speed possible. You could just press the button and go. Who cares about the level design? Just go fast. The boost in this game is handled much differently than that. To put it lightly, the boost in this game is not a boost. I know that there are people who are going to disagree with me, but functionally, the boost in this game is a run button. That's what it is. It is designed as a run button. It operates as a run button. And Sonic's main speed when he's running around the overworld is about as fast as he was in 06 when you are not holding the boost, solidifying my thoughts that this is just a run button. Now, this is handled basically the same way that Sonic Lost World handled its movement, and if you didn't like holding the run button in Lost World, it's a little better handled here, I'm not gonna lie. It feels like it takes the feeling of using the boost with the function of it being just Sonic's running button, and it marries them together into something that's a little better than, well, either of them in an open world setting, if the way that Sonic controls in a lot of fan games is to be believed. There's also some interesting things you can do with the boost. If you're holding it down while not moving, Sonic will enter a primed position as if he's about to start a foot race. This is, again, just looking like a Sonic plucked right out of Sonic Unleashed, about to do his ready, go from the beginning of each of that game's levels. Also, if you happen to boost near any type of foliage that is solid or off of any very, very slight incline, one of two things will happen. The physics engine will either keep Sonic glued to the ground, as can be seen in several areas of the map, or Sonic will launch himself up, and this is where you can start to break the game a little bit. Now, if it were more consistent, like, say, spin dash jumping in Sonic Adventure, then there would be a lot of fun stuff we could do with this, but I guess speedrunners will be there to map out the specifics on how the mechanics of this type of launching can be done. One of the more interesting ways you can use this is, say, in Ares Island. There is a mini-game where you're supposed to take a bullet to a cannon. The actual canister that holds the bullet, Sonic can use as a launch pad to just jump into the skybox. It's really strange, but it's also really cool that the game's physics allow for stuff like this, and it doesn't even feel like it's intentional. Speaking of launching yourself off of stuff, you'd think that the game would give you the ability to do that off of any cliff or any incline at all, but it doesn't really do that. Like I said, sometimes the game just decides that you need to be locking your feet on the ground, and if you so much as press the jump button, all of Sonic's momentum will stop, and you will enter whatever speed the jumping arc is supposed to have. Now again, I noted, this is Sonic feeling better as a platformer character than he ever has, and a lot of this comes down to the way the jump controls. The jump, as long as you are facing a single direction, controls very, very predictably, and that's a good thing for platforming. You also have the ability to use your dash ability, your boost, to gain an effective third jump since the double jump returns from Sonic Colors. And this can be used in a lot of areas to basically self-correct your jumps. It's like having a really janky version of Flood from Mario Sunshine. And I mean that with all the love possible. It feels very Sonic to have a super last-second, last-ditch attempt to save yourself as you jump off of a ledge near a bottomless pit, and these controls allow for that. However, there is something lost when I'm looking over a cliff on Ares Island, and I want to launch myself over to a platform, maybe even do a little bit of sequence breaking, but the game will not allow me to because the game does not want me to maintain momentum when I am launching. There is a way around this, though. The game does allow you to maintain momentum if you launch yourself off of a rail. Now, this is a really, really neat thing, but it's also a bit problematic. The great thing about this is you do get to do sequence breaking by jumping off of rails, because you can maintain all of the speed at the apex of the point you smash the jump button. The downside of this, though, is that a lot of rails lock your camera angle, so it's very hard to actually aim where you're going to be firing yourself. I know I'm complaining about something that's basically unintended from the developers, but as a fan of the Metroid series, I feel like accounting for those unintended ways players are going to try to break your game is kind of important. I mean, hell, look at the myriad of ways in which people have broken Sonic Adventure 1 and 2 going through those games. People have fun when they have the ability to spin dash off of a ramp and just fire themselves into the wild blue yonder. I wish this game had given us a little more ability to do that, but I am happy that the controls allow for a very good degree of precision as well as a very good degree of speed. The controls are also fully customizable. I'd highly suggest playing with the high-speed controls. Don't play with the action ones. They make you super slow in the overworld. They're not really worth it. But the action controls themselves are there if you've never played a Sonic game, I guess. Sonic also has a new ability called the Psy-Loop, on top of a brand new way of handling combat. We'll talk about combat a little later, but the Psy-Loop itself is very interesting. You see, one issue that Sonic's had in the past is the ability to maintain a tight turn without running into too many issues. In Sonic 06, he could manage it pretty well, but your momentum would basically stop if you did. Here, Sonic's precision controls feel just about right, so he's able to do things like run a figure 8 to get an infinite boost, or use the Psy-Loop to attack enemies, and it feels very, very seamless. When I was watching footage of the game, I felt like the Psy-Loop was going to be a hindrance, and it ended up being one of my favorite things to utilize while actually playing the game. So I'm happy to say that the Psy-Loop as a thing is probably something Sonic should be keeping in his arsenal from this point onward. Not only because it's fun to control, but it just feels like a more functional version of an ability I already enjoyed from Sonic Heroes. The tornado attack ability from that game always felt a little bit janky in that at the apex of your tornado you could launch yourself into the aether, but this keeping your feet on the ground but maintaining all of the benefits of that updraft you got in Heroes, this feels good. This feels right, and I'm okay keeping this. Now let's talk about cyberspace. So the daytime stages of Sonic Unleashed were some of the most absolutely adored pieces of Sonic media for people to return to. In fact, there's even a mod that superimposes all of the Sonic Unleashed stages into Sonic Generations so that people can still go back and play the original versions of Rooftop Run and the inferior version of Stage from Alaska. Now, I say inferior version because, I'm sorry, I think the Wii version of that game is better. In the daytime stages in that game were just better to me. But that's not super important. The reason I bring those up is we did this once before, and we did it really well. We did it 3 times, in fact, really well. We did it in Generations, we did it in Sonic Unleashed, and we did it in the Wii version of Sonic Unleashed, even though that was held by a bit of a different development team. Sonic Colors felt like it took this formula and did it a little too much in 2D. It was okay, but not great. And Forces basically shat on this formula and made it completely and utterly borked. This game feels like it's a little closer to the Sonic Forces way of controlling things, and not in a great way. The cyberspace stages are incredibly short for the most part, with the exception of the levels that are lifted from Unleashed and Adventure 2. I would have liked some representation for Adventure 1 levels, but I can understand them being harder to implement. Adventure 1 had no rail grinding, and the levels were a little bit different in design than what we got in Adventure 2. Adventure 2 levels are more corridor-based and work a lot better for the style that cyberspace is going for. I understand that. But I've got a bunch of problems with this. Not only do we have a set of levels that do not control that well, because somehow 2D Sonic controls do not work very well in this game at all for what they're supposed to be, but we also have levels that have no business existing in the way that they do. We do have a explanation in the game that the reason the levels are reused assets from Green Hill, Chemical Plant, a random city, and then also Angel Island, Sky Sanctuary. The reason that they are reused level assets and level layouts from previous games is because this is all pulling from Sonic's memories, because the story treats cyberspace as a repository of basically all of the world's knowledge. Now, that's a really cool explanation, and it's a really neat thing, and I can really appreciate it, especially putting Eggman in cyberspace. And when we get to the story, we'll talk about this a bit more, but having Eggman in cyberspace, and the enemies he deals with are mostly the gun robots, and like gun helicopters and tanks and stuff like that. Like, it makes sense if cyberspace is a place built from people's memories, that the foes that they face will be ones exclusively from their memories. As a result, Eggman is always in a city. One of his biggest campaigns and one of his greatest failures was, of course, in Station Square. This works thematically, and I'm okay with that. What I'm not okay with is the fact that we have, for the first time, levels that have no character. I recognize Skyrail's layout because I've played Sonic Adventure 2 a whole lot, but I don't like playing it when it's mapped over with Green Hill as the aesthetic, with an EDM track in the background that, as much as I enjoy, because I really do like the music for the cyberspace levels, one of the big things about Sonic level design is that the music behind the levels adds to the character of the area. I want you to imagine Rooftop Run, that beginning note sequence as you're about to rocket yourself up onto buildings. That is embedded into your head if you've played Sonic Unleashed, either version. Think about the opening notes of City Escape. Think about the moment in Ice Cap Zone in Sonic Adventure when you're about to jump onto the board. All of these moments are littered with iconic musical cues that are reminiscent of the level. When you think about those musical cues, you think about those levels. So what happens when we have this really decent music, but we have levels that have no soul because the assets used for them are pulled from other games. The level designs are pulled from more different games. We have one bit of uniqueness to these levels, and that is the music. Everything else is pulled from somewhere else, meaning that this music, as decent as it is, it has no identity to latch itself onto, and I want to remember these tracks, but a big part of me remembering a lot of Sonic tracks is remembering the feeling I got when I first heard them, remembering the zone I was in when I first heard them. There is no such memory associative technique that I can do this time, because what am I going to think? Ah, yes, Flowing Through Time, the amazing cyberspace song that is from level 1-2. I'm sure that works really well in Mario games when there's actually a thematic thoroughfare for you to run through in your levels, especially the earlier ones, but we've long since moved past that particular bit of level design in our platformer games. We can have unique names for these areas, and we can have unique assets for them as well. It would be just as easy, since there's only 4 different cyberspace areas, instead of using assets from Chemical Plant, using assets from Green Hill, using assets from other disparate points in Sonic's history, it would be better have 4 unique sets of assets could be used for these 4 areas. Like, give me a unique set of assets for Kronos Island cyberspace levels, and then have Act 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 for that, the same way we had in Sonic Colors. I wouldn't be opposed to that. Give us a unique set of assets that can be used specifically for Ares Island and Chaos Island and Kronos Island. With at least having a unique set of level assets, that would do a lot to give a little bit of life to these cyberspace levels. They don't have any, and I know there are narrative reasons for them not to have this, but if you have to sacrifice gameplay for story, you need to have a damn good reason to sacrifice gameplay for story. For instance, in the genocide route of Undertale, gameplay is sacrificed for the sake of narrative, and I'm okay with that, because you have to choose to engage in that narrative, and the game makes you feel shitty for choosing the genocide route. I'm okay with that. I'm less okay in, say, Kingdom Hearts 358 Days Over 2, when the game starts feeling grindy and monotonous, because Roxas is feeling like his tasks are grindy and monotonous. I get it, the character feels like he's weighed down, but I don't need to feel that way as well. Likewise, cyberspace doesn't need to feel like a place that has no identity of its own. Even if the controls were just as garbage as they are right now, these levels having some kind of unique identity associated with them would at least make people feel much better about them. As it stands, they are old assets, old level layouts, all just kind of jammed together to make the equivalent of special stages for this game. And when you view these as special stages for Sonic Frontiers, that makes it a little more okay. I mean, they literally do function the way special stages used to. You go here to earn the things you need to get Chaos Emeralds. But still, we've done Boost Formula before. We've done Boost Formula with unique level layouts and assets before. I don't see why we couldn't do that here, except for something we'll talk about near the end of the video, because I think I have a theory why cyberspace ended up this way. So, let's talk that open zone, because I know that this is the part that people have been most concerned about and most thrilled about as they've been playing the game. if I'm being 100% honest with you, the open zone makes this game. It feels good to exist here. It feels good to run around in the map. It feels amazing to launch yourself off of rails and find different sequency breaking stuff. There's 2D sections in here that are somewhat an approximation to cyberspace. They're a little bit different. It's very hard to describe how it feels different to control, but you'll notice it when you play. There's things like getting accidentally locked into your combat stance and stuff that doesn't happen in cyberspace that does happen in the 2D areas for open world. But as you're playing the game, you will start to notice these little tiny differences. It's not a lot, but it's enough to make it stand out. But a fun thing about the open zone is you can ignore a lot of 2D sections in the game. The 2D sections basically exist to allow you to get memory tokens, and memory tokens are different for every character aesthetically, but they're not really different in terms of function. The way the game's collectibles are set up is you've got vault keys that are used for unlocking Chaos Emeralds and memory tokens that are used for unlocking story beats. And story beats in every island, for the most part, unlock half of the Chaos Emeralds. So really, it's just vault keys and memory tokens unlock Chaos Emeralds. And unlocking Chaos Emeralds moves you further along in the story. Now, I found myself wanting to get as many of these tokens as I could because I was enamored in the story taking place here in the open zone. I'll talk about that a little more when I get to the story, but the open zone itself lends itself very well to this feeling of discovery. If you see something neat off in the distance, you can get to it, with a couple of exceptions. There's a volcano in Chaos Island that I would have loved to get to the top of and explore some of the depths of it from the inside out, but we're not really allowed to do that. And a lot of surfaces are built so that you can't run up them, but you can spin dash up them. And I'm not gonna lie, it feels really good to use the drop dash to move around those environments. But then there are some areas, especially when you get to Koronos Island, that are a little more sheer and are a lot harder to navigate while using the spin dash jump. It's almost like once you get to these areas, they're programmed to not allow you to actually move forward the way you want anymore. The open zone itself also feels best in the first two islands. Kronos Island and Ares Island feel like the most thought was put into how they would operate. By the time you get to Chaos Island, though, the game starts to not quite fall apart, but definitely starts to feel a bit different. When you get to Chaos Island, the game starts relying more on these 2D sections to get around, and the island itself is broken up into several smaller islands that the only way to get to is by using rails that are at very specific locations on the outskirts of each island. And if you don't know that going in, it'll feel really strange to see an objective off in the distance, but being completely unable to get to it. And Chaos Island specifically plays a lot of tricks on you in this regard. You see, when you are looking at those objectives off in the distance, you think to yourself, hey, maybe I can use a rail to rocket myself to one of those islands, and maybe someone will find a way to do that, but I couldn't. And then there's these enemies around you that you can latch onto in order to fly around the map. And then you think to yourself, maybe I can use these to get to these islands, and no, you really can't. These enemies probably would have been better suited in somewhere like Ares Island, where gliding down to lower platforms is more feasible, whereas gliding around with them here on this map is kind of worthless. I don't really feel that great navigating Chaos Island. Once you get the internal logic of Chaos Island, it's not as bad, but I digress. Also, the game has a fast travel system, but my first playthrough of the game, I didn't really get to utilize it. You see, the way the fast travel system in Sonic Frontiers works is once you have 100%ed a map, you can fast travel to the Elder Coco, you can fast travel to the other Coco, or you can fast travel to the cyberspace levels. Now, this sounds great on paper, but This means that if there are story beats or other things that you want to be able to fast travel to, you have to wait until you've already 100% of the map, and some maps cannot be 100%ed until you are basically near the end of their stories. So the fast travel is really used more than anything as a way to complete your area. Get tokens that you've missed, get story beats that you might have missed, because there's a lot of optional story beats in the game, especially in ways you can talk to and confront Sage. There's a lot of that stuff in the map. And the only way to really fast travel around to make it easier to get to them is by already 100%ing the map. I'm not sure if I feel great about how this is implemented, but there is a saving grace here. There are these signposts all around the map, and if you complete the puzzle at any of these signposts, you will be given a rail, a white rail specifically, that will connect to the next signpost that you have gotten. To an extent. It doesn't go to every single one of these locations, but it goes to enough to where you have an approximation to a decent rail system that exists in a city that is, functional. Not really any city in America, unfortunately, except maybe New York. But I digress. The point is, there is a fast travel method in the game utilizing these. Think World of Warcraft's griffins and hippogriffs being used as fast travel as opposed to a mage's teleport. You don't get access to the mage's teleport until you 100% the map, but you do always have access to the griffins or hippogriffs. Now, this feels decently good, especially considering that the way that you can get to certain locations early in the map is by launching yourself off these rails, and the white rails are built the same way the black ones are. Black rails are used for getting memory tokens and general progression, whereas white rails are used for fast travel between areas. Whenever you reveal an area of your map with one of these signposts, the next signpost will be shown on your map. So it is not terribly hard to 100% in the map, but again, in areas, especially like in Coronos Island, parts of that map are locked out until you hit story beats later, so it may be harder for you to get to those. But there is one other thing located on this map besides cyberspace that we need to talk about. Actually, two other things. One thing is bigger than the other, but let's talk about the smaller one first. There are mini-bosses on every single map with the exception of one, and I'll get to that in a bit. And these mini-bosses are honestly incredibly fun highlights for the game, especially the sumo boss in Ares Island being one of my favorite bosses on any of these maps. Ashura is also a decently fun boss, though certainly less fun as you level up, where the boss fight becomes very, very quick and dirty. However, these bosses are required, for the most part, so that you can get portal gears. These little gears are used to unlock cyberspace stages, and those cyberspace stages are what unlocks the vault keys, and vault keys are for unlocking Chaos Emeralds. And then general map progression is what gets you the memory tokens. You see how this is all laid out? You'll be getting memory tokens as you walk around. You'll encounter a boss. You'll break the boss's neck. You'll go to a cyberspace stage with that, getting more memory tokens on the way, and then you'll get your vault keys from the cyberspace stage, and hopefully you'll have enough to do some story progression after that. It's very Banjo-Kazooie meets Sonic the Hedgehog, and in a really good way. The other big thing we need to talk about is, well, big. I have my theories as to why he's here on the Starfall Islands, and I'll get to those when I get to the story section, but Big the Cat being here is a little weird, but it makes sense. We have what is effectively an open world game split into 4 areas with a 5th little sprinkle area for story reasons, and a fishing minigame being in that environment makes sense, and Big the Cat is a great conduit to have a fishing minigame here in the islands. Now, a really neat thing about the way this game works is you can always fish for any item you need for story progression. You could literally fish for all story progression. You could ignore all bosses, all cyberspace stages, all of it, and just fish. When I got to the final island, trust me, I ended up doing that quite a bit, because that last island's a little rough around the edges. So there's another interesting thing about Big here. He's actually really endearing. I'm not gonna lie. Big the Cat is such a meme in the Sonic community that seeing a version of him that's actually enjoyable to watch is honestly great, and it's something we haven't really gotten outside of the comics in a really long time. But yeah, those are my general thoughts on the overworld. There's one last thing I need to talk about, though, and it's a tiny thing. It's a tiny nitpick. Starfall. Now, Starfall is this game's equivalent to Breath of the Wild's Blood Moon, this being when all of the enemies respawn, and the game gets a little harder for you for a brief bit. In the Blood Moon times, this happens frequently enough to be somewhat annoying, but at least it means that the world will populate for people to beat with your ever-breaking weapons. Here, though, Starfall means the game is about to break. First of all, 10% of your screen will be cut off by a lottery system, and every single time you get a star piece on the ground, it will initiate a spin of the lottery. If you're trying to do story beats at that exact moment, I hope you enjoy every single time you leave a story beat being interrupted by the lottery going da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Also, this is where the game breaks. I mentioned that you can get every collectible via fishing. There is no punishment to collecting every star piece you possibly can. So every star piece you get will get you more tokens to go to Big the Cat, so that you can get more collectibles from Big the Cat. This breaks progression a lot. When tokens are just locked behind looking around the world, then progression is gated at least a little bit by how much of the map you've discovered. But if you can just AFK and wait for Starfall, you could just beat every single island without raising a thumb. For a lot of people, that may seem really endearing, and I can see the appeal to that. Except that Starfall goes on for way too long, takes up a chunk of my screen, is completely non-negotiable, and I have no way of avoiding it. And it sucks too, because it's beautiful whenever it happens, and it has even some thematic resonance near the end of the game, but I just hate every single time the game forces me into one of these sequences. I just want them to end as soon as they appear. I even contemplated a few times walking away from stream while this was happening, but that wouldn't be good content. Next, we really need to talk about that combat system. So, Sonic Frontiers has a skill tree that has multiple different attacks that you can unlock, locked behind experience points that you'll gain by killing enemies. Now, this skill tree is interesting on the surface because we've not had something like this in Sonic before, if you don't count the level up systems from Generations, Black Knight, and even Secret Rings into account. Now, this is a weird thing to me, because one of the benefits of a skill tree is supposed to be that a character can be customized. Skill trees in Diablo and World of Warcraft and other Western RPGs are built so that you can have your version of a rogue, your version of a paladin, your version of this, that, or the other thing. Whereas what we have here is a skill tree that basically just goes from the top to the bottom. It doesn't look like it. It looks like there's choice in here, but there's really no good option where this tree is concerned. You just kind of pick what you can grab at the time and go forward. All skills are useful and they will all help you in your journey throughout the game, but there's no real decision making in this tree, so the idea of making it a tree is weird to me. As for the combat itself, it's serviceable enough. It's nice and snappy and fluid. It's a very Sonic combat system. It reminds me a lot of Sonic Battle, actually. Things like Sonic being able to kick air projectiles through the air. This is very reminiscent of how Sonic fights in Sonic Battle when he fires sonic booms out using a spin dash. So none of this is really off model. None of this is really off base from what we've seen from Sonic before, but it is interesting seeing it in this unique setting as opposed to just in a fighting game that is, of course, built around combat. I enjoy fighting enemies in this game. It's a lot of fun. I like using the Psyloop to break shields off enemies, though if there's one issue that I do have, it's that the ranged attack is a bit overpowered. It's the best ability for stacking up combos on enemies, and it's the best ability for fighting enemies once you get to Ares Island that try to stay away from you, or enemies that happen to use shields to break up your combos. They don't turn on those shields as long as you're hitting them with a ranged attack, so you can just cheese the enemies, and of course the lock-on system locks onto each enemy as you go, so you can just hover in the air and Shadow the Hedgehog all the enemies down. It's a really interesting pick. It feels like the combat needs a lot of polish before it's as robust as something like, say, a Bayonetta, a God of War, or even a No More Heroes. And yet, I feel like it could be any of those things. Now I'm just imagining a combat simulator that is being heralded by, say, Platinum Games, using Sonic as a fighter. That sounds awesome to me, and this system feels like it's about 3 steps away, like maybe 3 good runs through the oven before it could be something like that. But what we have here is still leagues above combat in any other Sonic game, and this still feels good. If there's one thing I haven't mentioned in the other levels that I want to mention here, it's the homing attack. This has been the primary way for Sonic to fight in 3D for the longest time, and it feels really good in this game. There's a bunch of people who don't like the delay when the homing attack hits someone, but I'm going to be honest, I feel like that adds to the impact of the homing attack. I really feel like I'm crunching into an enemy when I slam into them with this attack, and that's in cyberspace combat or in open zone combat. Either way, it feels nice, crunchy, and painful when this attack slams into someone. And that's something that I can't even say for Sonic Adventure. Enemies kind of squished in that game when you slammed into them. Even heroes, they just kind of fell behind when you hit. It didn't feel like you were really interacting with them, like you were part of that environment. Adventure 2 got this down pretty well, but this, I think, is probably the best this has felt from a visceral standpoint. Maybe lower the hover time in the air a little bit so that we can chain together homing attacks better, but this still feels like something that I want. I want to chain homing attacks better, but I also like that feeling of just reminiscing in the feeling of an enemy crunching under my feet whenever I use an attack. It feels good. The combat's fine. The combat when you get into boss fights, it's the same thing. It's very, instead of just fighting an enemy and reading their tells, it's very finding the weak point on the boss and typically aiming the ranged attack at the weak point until you can earn a rush attack. I wouldn't quite call it bare bones, but I also wouldn't quite call it polished. It's somewhere in the middle, and it feels really good for what it is. This feels like a good foundation. Another couple of years, and this could actually build into a very robust, very fun combat system. I can't wait to see what the developers do with this, assuming Sega gives them the time to. But of course that leads into the mini-bosses. I pointed out that mini-bosses require you to attack them so that you can get portal keys, so that you can go and get your collectibles to get Chaos Emeralds. Mini-bosses are fine, honestly. Some of them are standouts. Like I said, the sumo boss is amazing. Asura is a really, really cool showcase mini-boss. Ninja is also a fun boss in the beginning of the game, but I feel like the mini-bosses start to fall apart after Chaos Island. Once you get to Koronos Island, the mini-bosses that are on display are all reskins of ones from the other half, Kronos Island. And yeah, thematically that makes sense. Geographically, we're on the same plot of land, but at the same time, this is the last island. I should be fighting the strongest enemies here, and those enemies shouldn't look like reskins of older ones. This isn't a beat-em-up after all, where we only have like 5 sprites to swap between, and recoloring is what we need. This is a modern game in 2022. There are some other bosses that I feel probably need a little more time in the oven. The squid boss is basically the running on Stardust section from Sonic Colors, except with a boss fight attached to it. This fight feels fine, but if you don't gain infinite boost before the fight, it definitely feels like it drags on for quite a bit. The shark fight in the desert is also another one of those that I feel drags on a little further than it really should. It's not that what we have on display here isn't fun, it's that what we have on display here lasts a little too long. These are, after all, mini-bosses, and they respawn every time Starfall hits. The one concern I had about the combat system with Sonic Frontiers was that it would feel like it dragged on too much because it wasn't a game equipped to have that kind of combat system. The mini-bosses sometimes feel great, but they sometimes feel like they're the thing dragging the combat down. And I don't like that, because I want to love all of these. The designs have certainly been inspiring to some very strange portions of Twitter, but all in all, what we have here is, like with the combat, it's a good foundation. I want to see some proper Sonic bosses as opposed to generic enemies that will utilize this combat system going forward. Imagine a battle with Chaos Zero where you're having to actually block and parry and dodge and all that fun stuff. But of course, that naturally leads into conversations about the bosses of the game, the Titans, these giant hulking Evangelion-style beasts that have no business existing in a Sonic game, but oh my god, are they glorious here. This is the highlight of the game. Sonic Frontiers felt like a mixed bag to me, and I'll get to my verdict later, but it felt like a mixed bag until I got to the Giganto boss fight. Once that happened, oh my god. A weird thing about these fights is they all require you to be in supersonic form, which does make sense given the collectathon nature of the overworld. Getting the Chaos Emeralds, of course, you want to have some reason to get them, and you want the world to have enough collectibles so that you aren't just getting 7 big ones and then leaving. Again, we've come a long way since Banjo-Kazooie, and even that had 10 major collectibles in each world. So, what do I think about the boss fights mechanically? Mechanically, there's not a whole lot going on here. The spectacle is what you're here for. These are giant hulking monstrosities that are going to push everything we've seen in Sonic to its limit. Even Perfect Chaos did not necessarily have the same size as the Wyvern or the Knight. But the actual boss fights themselves have a very strange mechanic that I do not like. And I've avoided talking about it in the combat section because I wanted to talk about it specifically here. You see, in Sonic Frontiers, we have a parry system. Now, in other games of this ilk, a parry system is set up to where you time your parry to the exact moment an enemy is going to hit you, and the parry will deflect the attack and give you some type of benefit for parrying the attack. Sonic Frontiers doesn't do this. The parry operates more like a block. You just hold up your dukes and block an attack, and it parries it away, giving you all the benefits of said parry. This means that these boss fights, the reason they don't end up being much mechanically is for a combination of 2 reasons. The biggest one being the parry. You can spend all fight just holding the parry and then waiting for a quick time event prompt, and that will clear the boss fight for you. It will clear almost every boss fight, for the most part, with the exception of, say, the Knight. But the other bit is this, because I want to talk about the parry a little bit more in a sec, but the last thing that makes these boss fights weird is the stomp attack. So every attack that Sonic can do does about 100 to 200 damage to the boss, depending on what level your attack is, because you do level that up throughout the game. However, if you are striking a boss and you use the stomp in the middle of your combo, Sonic will both break away from the boss, dodging any potential attacks, and land on the boss for about 3,000 damage. It is by far the fastest damage you can do to a boss with anything in your arsenal. I don't have the math for it, but I don't think any attack does the same amount of damage for the amount of time spent to it, and especially it doesn't have the safety of physically jumping away from the boss for the duration of the attack. The stomp and the parry combined absolutely break every single one of these fights. But I just don't care. Because holy fucking shit, the hype that you feel when you enter any one of these boss fights is insane. The music is screaming at you. The boss is massive. Sonic is fighting like a shonen anime protagonist again. It is a glorious spectacle. And despite them being glorified cutscenes, I'm kind of okay with that. There are games that can be cutscenes and still be good. I like the Walking Dead game, after all. But this is, again, another one of those things that just needs a little bit more polish. If the bosses had a little bit more of an involved combat system, I feel like they'd stand out even more, because what is on display here is great, with the exception of the final boss. The last 2 bosses of the game, the last single boss mainly, if you're not in hard mode, feel a little broken. So the boss fight with supreme. It has a bunch of parry nodes like every other boss. There's moments where it wants you to parry attacks. Those moments feel broken. They feel like they're not properly programmed. Whereas with Giganto and Wyvern, they feel amazing. And with Knight, it feels underdeveloped but still cool. Now, I do need to talk about the last boss. We'll talk about it more from a story perspective, but from a mechanical perspective, holy fucking shit. I didn't expect to be forced to play Ikaruga with a theme song sounding like it's from Undertale to fight the last boss. This would give me feelings if I cared about this actual enemy, but I don't, so yeah, no, I think there's 2 amazing boss fights, 1 solid one, and then 2 that just kind of happen at the end of the game. I'm not a big fan of these last 2, but the boss fight experience is still a good experience. It just, like everything else, wants a little more polish. Alrighty, it's at this point I think we need to talk about Sonic Frontiers' story. But we can't exactly start with the game because there's actually 2 prequel stories that happen before this. First thing you want to get in your system is the Knuckles animation that was put onto YouTube that shows Knuckles on Angel Island getting his first little gear that we would later see in the game that teleports him over to the Starfall Islands, and then he gets into a fight with the first Titan like we do, and then he's gone. He's out, and that's why we've got to rescue Knuckles in the main game. And then as for why Sonic, Tails, and Amy are at the island, we figure that out kind of, sort of, in the prequel comic that IDW puts out. Why this information couldn't have also been placed in the game itself, I don't know. I love the IDW comics, I really do, but the opening animation having these fun little re-recordings of stuff that Dean Bristow used to say for Eggman would have been honestly kind of great to actually hear voiced by Mike Pollock, or even had legitimate recordings of these things from Sonic Adventure playing so that could be the thing that clued everybody in that this wasn't really Eggman fighting us. However, we get to begin the story of Sonic Frontiers with Sonic, Tails, and Amy on the Tornado, which I'm gonna be honest, Okay, so just a quick opinion part from me. This is completely and totally a nitpick. This has nothing to do with the quality of the story that we do get, but I don't like the Tornado biplane. I don't. And it's not that I don't like the design. I like the design of this. I've liked it since Sonic 2. Here's my problem. This is not Tails' plane anymore, at least not in my opinion. Tails' plane has been the Tornado 3 for the longest time in my head, so having Tails using anything besides that has always felt kind of off to me. Why would Tails go back to previous inferior models of the Tornado in Unleashed, in Lost World, and in this game, when we know for a fact from Sonic Adventure 2 and Shadow the Hedgehog, he's got the Tornado 3 up and running and still usable. It's never been destroyed or gone away. Now, I know in the IDW comics, the Tornado 3 is actually destroyed during the Metal Virus saga, but considering that Unleashed and Lost World both use this Tornado biplane, I don't think that that has any bearing on anything. So before you go to the comment section explaining how this version of the Tornado was actually ripped apart by Zombots, yeah, I know. He didn't use it in other stories either. I don't know, it's just really weird for me. I love Tails as a character, and the fact that he would willingly go back to an inferior model is just strange, especially considering the combat potential of the thing. Like, they knew they were going onto an island where Eggman was, and it's really easy for Tails to, tangle with Eggman when he's going mech to mech. I don't know, just weird things for me. Call me an Adventure 2 fanboy, but I like Tails when his plane can turn into a mech at will. That whole bit about Tails' plane aside, All that's important is that the 3 of these characters and then Knuckles, thanks to the animation we've already talked about, will be on the Starfall Islands. Now, how does Eggman get there? Well, the very first scene we see in this game is Eggman making his way to the island using the Sage AI that he had created in the prequel comic to try to interface with the ancient technology here. Basically, this is technology that has been in rest mode for thousands of years, and it's incredibly advanced, more advanced than anything that Eggman has been able to make. As a result, a little thing happens that the game doesn't really explain super well, but it's kind of more of a subtext thing. You see, there is a way that the Sage AI works in the comic book, and a way that the Sage AI works when Eggman puts Sage onto this construct here and begins the process of awakening the islands, which, as we'll find out later, is also not a good thing because it slowly awakens the end, and none of that super matters right now, but I want to point out that there is a way that Sage is personified now, and then there's a way that Sage will be personified in the main game. I have a theory as to why there's a change, and it's basically that because the ancients' cyberspace technology allowed them to do things like manifest matter and catalog thoughts and transfer thoughts and data and blurring the lines between all of that, basically this super advanced tech, once integrated into Sage, basically made it to where Sage, the person, was born at this point. And I think it's also one of the reasons why Eggman doesn't see Sage as a person in the beginning. She's a construct like Orbot or Cubot, a thing to be used, abused, and worn out. But then that's really not what happens throughout this story. Eggman's going to take on a much more fatherly role by the end of things, and I think a lot of that is thanks to this ancient technology. There's other things this tech is going to be doing that's really important, but we'll talk about that in a bit. Let's go ahead and zip back to what happens with Sonic, Tails, and Amy. As they approach the island, an electrostatic or electromagnetic barrier seems to be around the island. It's completely invisible to the naked eye, but it completely screws up the tornado, and it ends up sucking all of them into cyberspace after they get there. Now, I know that I've got a video that I'm going to be doing about Shadow the Hedgehog, and I'm going to spoil a bit for that right now. I actually nixed the entirety of the story that takes place in the internet there. I've not a huge fan of how that game handles cyberspace. Being able to jump into data streams doesn't make any sense there, and that's kind of further solidified by the fact that this game makes such a big deal about the fact that going into the internet, basically going into cyberspace, is a huge thing for this technology. It's one of the things that makes this technology so advanced compared to regular old Earth technology or even stuff that Eggman is able to make. He even notes that he's made some virtual constructs like this, but they are nowhere near as advanced as what is on display in the Ancients technology. So, I don't know. I'm just still not a huge fan of the cyberspace stuff in Shadow the Hedgehog. That's just me. Point is, Sonic and the gang find themselves trapped in cyberspace. Now, you're of course only playing as Sonic in this one. This is almost a Sonic Adventure 3 of sorts, and we still only get to play as Sonic. That is something that I will get into my thoughts in later on in the review, which I know is a really awkward thing to hear when we're an hour into the video, but, you know, you're already here. You're gonna make it to the end just fine, don't worry. Anyway, storyline-wise, Sonic is in cyberspace, and this is where we find ourselves trapped in Green Hill. But this Green Hill is actually a one-to-one of Apotos from Sonic Unleashed. Now, I'm not really going to be talking about the cyberspace stages more than I already have. They're analogs for other games, and they're basically... the best thing I can say is they're kind of constructed from Sonic's memories. There are 4 main locales that you'll visit in cyberspace, and each of them reflects an aspect of each of the main characters in this story. Sonic himself is tied intrinsically to Green Hill, so that explains that. Tails is tied intrinsically to Chemical Plant. Even though this is not where Sonic and Tails met each other, it is the first brush Tails had with the more industrial side of Eggman's complex, if you don't talk about other extra games in the... I'm not going to get into the Sonic Timeline J reviews just did. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that right now. It's not important. We, of course, have assets from Angel Island as well, because Knuckles is one of the characters trapped in cyberspace, so some of these levels will be constructed from important bits of his memory. And then we have a random city. Now, I know that there's been a lot of talk about why the hell is this here. Realistically, this is here, in my personal opinion, because both Eggman and Amy have ties to this kind of location. Note that Amy lives in Station Square in Sonic's canon, and Eggman, for his part, has a lot of ties to city structures. He's a human, so this is very likely the type of place that he used to live growing up, on top of the fact that Eggman constantly has to have just run-ins with Gun in the city structures, which is a noted thorn in his side in different bits of Sonic canon. It also explains why the city is the place that he is trapped in. This would have been made off of his memories exclusively, and a lot of his memories are probably tied to this type of location. I guess to headcanon, Eggman grew up in a big city. No wonder he's such an asshole. Realistically, this is all done as an excuse to reuse level assets that they've already been using since Sonic Generations and Sonic Forces and Sonic Unleashed, and, well, pretty much every 2D, 3D Sonic game that's been using the boost formula has been using these assets outside of Sonic Colors. And then the level geometry itself, the actual makeup of the level you run through, is built off of the backbone of mostly previously used level design, stuff from Sonic Generations and Sonic Adventure 2. There's even a 1/3 of a City Escape level in here that we get to go into. That's neat, I guess. All in all, the cyberspace areas have an interesting story reason for being as bland as they are, so I can kind of forgive them. I like them more from a story perspective than I do from a gameplay perspective, so I guess there's that. But getting out of cyberspace, Sonic now finds himself on the first island, Kronos Island, which is actually one half of the first island, because the fifth island is also Kronos Island, just spelled a little differently. You can tell when the budget ran out here, but he hears a menacing voice in the sky, so I guess we're just doing the Shadow of the Colossus thing. Defeat all the Titans, and then something will happen. The voice says the barrier between dimensions is going to be shattered if you beat all the Titans, and that is an interesting thing to say. Those were certainly a lot of words. None of those words mean anything to us, but Sonic apparently thinks that that means he's going to save his friends. So, yay! We then embark on our journey across the island and finally find Amy, who is trapped in what seems to be a giant spiky orb. There's nothing real important about that until we, open the dang thing. And when we do, Sonic is then infected with a bit of we don't know what. I'm just going to go ahead and call this cyberspace corruption. He's corrupted with cyberspace. Again, those words don't mean anything, but they are important to the plot for like a quarter of a second. So we're going to go ahead and point out that it's a thing that happens. Amy then gets a chance to explain what being trapped in cyberspace was like for her, which is very different than how Sonic and Eggman experience cyberspace. Apparently, all the characters, aside from these two, experience cyberspace as a type of perpetual nightmare, whereas Eggman and Sonic experience it as a real location with real things that happen to them. Much less like a dream and much more like, a standard level. I don't know if this speaks to the sheer willpower of Sonic and Eggman and how they experience these areas, or if it's something unique to how cyberspace interacts with them, because Eggman has access to Sage and Sonic has a really, really close tie to the Chaos Emeralds, which are literally what power cyberspace. I don't know. This is something that is rife with the ability to headcanon it in practically whichever way you want. all that matters is that Sonic is now reunited with Amy, even though Amy is not fully outside of cyberspace. She is very close to a ghost. Now, it's kind of interesting that in the trailers for this game, we had this ghost girl that we heard about who was going to be helping Sonic on his quest. And we do kind of have Ghost Girl Amy now. It's funny how the narrative behind that kind of changed over time. If you were listening to Sunset City or any analysis of this game, we thought that Amy was going to be a very Navi or Fee-like character, but no, we just have Amy interacting with us every now and again, looking around for a couple of Chaos Emeralds, which is still helping Sonic, but not quite as directly involved with us as I thought she originally was going to be. Amy will pop up randomly in different places of the map. There are versions of Amy that you can interact with that will give you bits of story info that are tangential to everything happening, and then there are versions of her you can interact with that actually push the plot forward. Sidebar, you can also interact with Sage at various points of the map, and it will do the same thing as interacting with Amy during the non-story progression points. You'll get little bits of information, and in Sage's points, you will get little confrontations between Sonic and Sage, all verbal, mind you, and these are not well animated. These types of scenes basically just use the models standing still and barely emoting at each other as they talk, which it's fine. It's fine. This is a step above what we would get in something like Sonic Forces, where the characters were just kind of talking in speech bubbles mainly. But this is also a step below what we would get in a lot of other Sonic productions. But I don't hate it. I would rather have this than what we had in Forces. And a lot of the stuff we get here, story bit-wise, is not super important, but it is nice. There's also a couple of other ways that we can get little bits of story details while going across the island. You see, anytime Sonic comes near something that is important in his mind, a structure, or, just a random bit of scenery, he will stop and explain to you exactly how he feels, which jury's up and about on whether or not this is a good thing. I don't think I hate it, but I do think that it's a little bit agitating to have control ripped away from you randomly for anything other than the squid. I think the only time I'm okay when control is ripped away from me in this game is when the squid is there, because he's a friend. He's a friend, and there's two of them on Kronos Island, and he's a friend, and I like him. He's a friendly squid. He gives you a path to run on. Didn't you like that one level in Sonic Colors? This is just that. It's just that one level in Sonic Colors. Didn't you like Starlight Carnival? Squid is just Starlight Carnival as a boss. Do you like him? Do you enjoy him? He enjoys you. I'm getting sidetracked. But that's actually not the worst thing in the world. Getting sidetracked is a huge thing that this game wants you to do. You see, as you're running around in this giant map, you'll find just these random story beats as you go, and it wants you to get lost in this, and I'm kind of okay with that. Now, as we move the plot forward, Sonic finds more Chaos Emeralds that are unlocked with the Vault Key system, like I said before, and the Chaos Emeralds that are not locked on the island are scattered into random various places and found when you are interacting with Amy helping the Coco. And that is where we need to get to the next very important part of the story, the Coco. Now, I am a fan of Chao. I would love Chao to be back in a Sonic game, but I'm not gonna lie, I don't hate the Coco being a Chao replacement because of what they are to the story. For those who don't know, the Chao are kind of Chaos Zero specifically. He is the guardian of the Chao. In some versions of the story, he's even a mutated Chao, but we get to find out that these Coco, these are the precursors to the Chao, and they're also the precursors to Chaos. Throughout this story, we're going to see the destruction of a civilization of people who all look like Chaos Zero, but, lankier and smarter. That's a thing this game does. We get adventure callbacks. and they mean something. Speaking of callbacks, this game seems to have a callback fetish. If Channel Pup is listening at this point, this is where I'd like a montage of a handful of those callbacks just thrown up back to back to show how obnoxious some of these can be. But whether or not this bit of voiceover stays in the final video, I guess is up to his mercy. Please have mercy, Pup.
What a view! Makes me think of the falls and mystic ruins. Is this the place? Yo, Nux!
Sonic, this looks like ruins from back home. What if the people of these islands survived and resettled on Angel Island? They're going to assault the bunker! I can't lose this!
You've got this, buddy.
That was on par with Dark Gaia, easy.
Any higher and we'd risk Angel Island bumping into us. Hey, who was it who stopped Eggman from blowing up Station Square, huh? And who broke me out of prison, or saved me from the Deadly Six's trap?
But yes, the Coco. These guys are honestly really interesting. Now, while Sage is probably the most interesting character here, watching her go through the classic I am a robot and I will gain my humanity by the time this story is over story, that is a heart-wrenching and gut-punching narrative on its own. But the Coco, these guys are gonna rip you apart. So let's go ahead and get into it. Amy finds this lost Coco looking for her lover. Sonic explains that, no, he doesn't want to do that. There's much more important things to do, but Amy has a knack for this kind of stuff, so he guesses he'll go ahead and go with it. So Sonic then follows Amy, trying to reunite this lost Coco. And they happen across the Chaos Emeralds randomly as they do so, which is really convenient, but, the Chaos Emeralds were randomly conveniently found in a lot of locations in Sonic games up to this point. I'm basically used to this now. I've stopped caring. But as we get closer and closer to this Coco's lost lover, things start to get a little grim, a little dark, a little wrong. You see, by the time this story concludes, the Coco will find its lost lover. There is one on the island, and it is looking for it, and it will find it. They will be reunited. And then they'll die. And at first, it's kind of hard to figure out what happened. Is it just that when Coco are reunited with their lost loves, they die? Is that what happens? Is that just a part of their species? Do they just mate and then dead? Which is not a real easy way to keep a species going, but, who are we to judge? No. We get a flashback when this happens, a flashback to the time when the island was still inhabited by these chaos creatures. And we see that they're in the middle of what seems to be a war zone. And they try to reunite with each other in the middle of this war zone. And at the moment of being able to embrace, they are then killed, murdered by something, a presence that we will learn about later, but we don't know about yet. It's at this point that Amy has not quite a breakdown, but certainly a very quiet moment, which is something that I'm actually really happy this game has. These quiet, softer moments with the characters are something that Sonic games have not been doing for a long time. I'm going to be honest, the last 3 games that had these moments that I can remember to my knowledge are Adventure 2, the ending when Shadow died, Heroes, the ending when Rouge is very contemplative for about 3-ish seconds when Omega mentions that, you know about cloning, and a couple of moments scattered around in 06. Past that, we don't really get these softer spoken, tender moments for characters. Unleashed has some of this with Chip to an extent, but again, this is just not something Sonic has been doing for over a decade, and I appreciate it. One of the things this game does better than any other game in the series is to let a scene breathe. You get time to just mourn with Amy, and that sounds weird. We're talking about a cartoon blue hedgehog, but I'm going to be honest, my favorite anime of all time is about a guy who may or may not be a space alien monkey, where his hair turns orange/gold whenever he gets angry. I'm perfectly fine accepting that I like really, really dumb media that I think is just really cool. But anyways, so we kill our first set of Coco, and we do find other Coco throughout the island, but they don't matter too much to the plot. When we talk to the Elder and the other Coco, it's just, turn them in. I guess they die here too. It's whatever. What matters is that we will eventually get 6 Chaos Emeralds on this island after several instances of Sonic stopping to smell the roses and tell us about disparate bits of past Sonic games. Once you have these 6 emeralds, Sonic will go and try to fight the Titan that he failed to fight the first time. Oh yeah, I should probably mention the Titan. I completely glossed over Giganto. Holy shit, the first interaction with this guy is you getting your ass handed to you after trying to homing attack his snaz like 5 or 6 times. Sonic gets his ass beat, realizes he'll need to go supersonic, and then decides he's going to confront the Titan when he has more Chaos Emeralds. I completely forgot to mention it because despite the fact that this being a super important part of the story is, handed to us on a silver platter, I was honestly more interested in the stuff with Amy. That's right, the giant world-ending Evangelion boss that we get to fight in the beginning of the game is less interesting to me than the very subtle story of loss that we get to go through with Amy the Hedgehog. There's also one other thing that happens with Amy as well that makes her story more interesting to me, though, before we get to that fight with Giganto. That's the fact that, in this story, Amy leaves Sonic. And I mean, legitimately, not like what happened in Sonic Chronicles where she got a fake boyfriend and it was just to make Sonic jealous. No. Legitimately, Amy comes to the conclusion that she wants to go spread her type of love with the world instead of just waiting on Sonic. And even Sonic makes a note about this during a segment in the game that you can catch, where he says that he wishes he had an umbrella to hold over Amy, and he wishes he would have given her the truth about his real feelings, but it's a bit late now. At this point in the story, we've already experienced Amy explaining to Sonic that she's going to go do her own thing. And as we're going to find out, that's actually a theme going forward for all of this. Every character moving on from Sonic. But enough about that. We've got a giant fight with a Titan. We're gonna go and climb up his legs and steal the Chaos Emerald from his noggin, turn into Supersonic, spam the stomp button because that is literally the fastest way to kick this guy's ass. And then we are going to literally pull a Goku by going full-on headbutt through the chest. It was great when he did it to King Piccolo in Dragon Ball, and it's amazing when Sonic does it to Giganto here. I am completely on board with Supersonic being just absolutely brutal to these bosses, I'm not gonna lie. And this song is the most hype thing in the world. I wish I could play it for more than a quarter of a second here, but, YouTube copyright being all of that, I'm not gonna worry with it too much. Just go listen to it. Go listen to it. It's amazing. Anyway, we break through it all, right through the Titan's chest, and then we come down to see Amy and realize that, no, we haven't gotten her out of cyberspace just yet. So we've got to go ahead and head to another island and see what happens when we defeat even more Titans. And so now we get to go to the best island in the game, Ares Island, where we get to meet the absolute gayest lover boy of Sonic ever, Knuckles. But that's not before getting all the Chaos Emeralds knocked out of us because of, guns? Guns do it. Okay, I'm just gonna say this. There's something about the way that Chaos Emeralds are taken away from Sonic in here that I don't like. When Sonic is in his super form, he is supposed to be invincible, with the one exception that Knuckles was able to knock all the chaos out of him at one point, and then there was that one time where Eggman had a machine that was specifically designed to handle Supersonic by shocking all the Chaos Emeralds out of him. Aside from these two instances, we don't have a real reason why random gunfire should be able to knock the Chaos Emeralds out of him. I guess it kind of makes sense on the one hand that maybe ancient technology would be able to do this because the ancients, spoiler alert, they were the ones who brought the Chaos Emeralds to the world. So I guess them being able to shut down a super form makes kind of sense. At the same time, I don't know, maybe just canonically having Sonic run out of rings at this point or something would have worked. I don't know. I'm still kind of iffy on Sonic losing the Chaos Emeralds at the end of each island, only because it, as much as I understand it's necessary for the gameplay loop, I don't like it from a narrative perspective. I think that the boss fights in this game are the best we've had in any Sonic game at all. They are absolutely fantastic, and they are wonderful spectacles for Super Sonic. But I think this is where, from a narrative perspective, making every single fight in the game with a boss a Super Sonic boss fight kind of falls a little flat. Yes, we do get to see the ultimate showcase of Super Sonic's abilities in this game, because, dear God, this is the strongest we have ever seen this character. But at the same time, it does kind of kill what Super Sonic is for me a little bit. On the one hand, he's able to handle missiles and getting punched in the face and even having a pseudo chainsaw just drill into him. He's able to handle all of that, but, you know, single anti-air missile hits him from the ground in the desert, and suddenly he's lost all his Chaos Emeralds. I was willing to accept it in Unleashed, and I was willing to accept it in Sonic 3 and Knuckles, but here I think I'm just going to go ahead and say this is weird to me. Super Sonic is a really weird and inconsistent thing narratively. I do understand that the Chaos Emeralds, now we get to know that they literally act like Dragon Balls. They fire away from Sonic whenever he loses the form, and they go to disparate areas, and we know why they keep on latching themselves onto the island. As long as the Ancient's tech is activated by Sage, then the Emeralds are going to stay put on this island, the place of their origin on Earth. They will always rocket back to locations they were supposed to be in somewhere on the islands. I'm okay with that part here, and I can understand from a storytelling perspective it makes sense to have him lose the emeralds each time to showcase that the emeralds will stay put on this island for as long as the ancient tech is active. That's a cool thing, but it also just kind of makes Super Sonic weird to think about. From this point on. Normally in Sonic stories, we have the Chaos Emeralds as a thing that has gotten throughout the narrative and then used in the final fight, sometimes and sometimes not, but used near the end as a way to actually handle a boss that we otherwise wouldn't be able to take down. Whereas now, being used every single time, it's just kind of weird to me. I don't know. I'm sticking on this point for a long time. I recognize that. I'm going to go ahead and hop off of it, but just know that I'm a fan of my Super Sonics near the end, whereas Super Sonic at every single fight feels almost like a bit of a narrative contrivance. But we are now on Ares Island, and we get to meet up with Knuckles. After getting enough memory tokens to rescue him, we get the first of many, many scenes where Sonic and Knuckles will give each other the bedroom eyes. It's at this point that maybe perhaps a montage of the times Sonic and Knuckles give each other the bedroom eyes is appropriate. That is entirely on you, pup, if you are willing to throw that in here.
Ages ago, my people were wiped out by a cataclysm. I know the Coco faced something similar. It reminds me I'm the last Echidna, that I'm alone.
You may be the last, but you're not alone. You've got us, Knucklehead.
I'll admit, I do envy your lifestyle. Freedom to go where you want, when you want.
So do it. Get out there and live a little.
Maybe I could. But first, I need to be back to normal. So hurry up and get me back to normal.
Anything to get you away from me.
Let's do this!
He hopes those he is at odds with He is quick to make peace. Perhaps... No.
Yes!
I have run the simulations.
I'm not feeling too great.
We are doomed.
This is where Knuckles gets to explain to us the reason why he's here on the Starfall Islands. It would have been just as easy to have him on the plane, I guess, but I'm very happy that we had him transported here from Angel Island. It makes it not quite as contrived that he's been ripped away from the Master Emerald, as it were. Also, I should probably make an aside now to point out that a lot of the important story beats from Eggman's point of view are actually going to be told not in the story narrative, as it were. They actually get told in Big's Fishing. Now, in Big's Fishing, we get these little memory capsules that give us Eggman's audio logs. This is where we get to see his slow descent from evil mad scientist who created an AI to a loving, doting father. We also get to see his monologue about his feelings about Maria and several other past events that have happened in the Sonic story. And there's another fun note here. He also mentions that since Knuckles is trapped in cyberspace as well, he could just go and get the Master Emerald. He could just go do that. Like, seeing Knuckles away from the Master Emerald immediately makes him think of all the ways he could steal it, which, you know, he could if he wasn't stuck in cyberspace. That's kind of stopping him right now. Oh well, maybe next time, Eggy. We also get some scenes where Sonic gets to explain to Knuckles that the reason he's navigating the island so well is because he literally gets the map downloaded into his brain. Cyberspace is a thing that gets him to interface with the island as a unit, which, again, this makes it make sense. This makes the cyberspace levels make more sense. I can understand it. They're fine narratively, like I said. But now we get to see the big boss here, and I'm actually going to mention this one in actual chronological order, unlike Giganto. But here is Wyvern, and at this moment we get to see that Sage is not actually controlling the Titans. She's merely giving them a push, giving them a shove. Sage has Wyvern attack us, and we get to have this really cool sequence trying to escape a shit ton of missiles from Wyvern. I like this. I like Sonic losing to these bosses. As much as I don't like repeated supersonic fights in the same game, I feel like that diminishes the cool factor of supersonic for me by the time we get to the end. I do like seeing Sonic have to get his ass trounced by these guys, which gives us a good narrative reason to need supersonic. I like this. Sage tells us that we need to go ahead and leave, which, again, this is not the first time she's told us. I just skipped over that when talking about Giganto. I'm sorry! I'm really happy with Amy's story in this game. Leave me alone! We then, after collecting more and more of these medals, have an interaction with Sage where she tries to kill us and Knuckles saves us, which shows us that Sage, like Knuckles, is a being of cyberspace. This further cements my theory that Sage as a character is not just the AI construct, was literally manifested by the Ancients' technology. So, of course, a person who is stuck in the realm of the Ancients' technology would be able to interact with Sage. This is where Sonic is clued in that Sage is trying to protect something. We know at this point she's trying to protect Eggman from the end. But again, we don't know what the end is yet. I'll get into that later. Or I won't. It depends on how well the game explains the end. And now we get to interact with the Coco again. This time, Knuckles is showing off some of his finesse from Sonic Forces as a commander of an army by trying to take these more militarized Coco and link them up with another unit. So as opposed to finding a couple of lost lovers, which is of course Amy's forte, we are going to see the more militarized side of this society. Much like before, this is going to randomly nab us Chaos Emeralds because we will conveniently happen upon them throughout our journey trying to help these Coco link up with their other unit and showing Knuckles be the commander that he pretended to be in Sonic Forces. I'm glad to know that Operation Big Wave didn't just lead to the deaths of many, but, I mean, you saw what happened to the Coco last time. Maybe his next operation will go just as well. Sage, of course, knowing what the Coco are because she has interfaced with cyberspace and is an AI designed to take full advantage of literally all of the amassed knowledge of this ancient civilization, laments that Sonic should be aware of what the Coco are at this point, and is wondering why he's trying to help them when their fates are already decided, showing us that it may not necessarily be that Coco find their lovers and die. We may have something else on our hands. The next bit in the story is Sonic and Knuckles happening upon where these Coco made their last stand, and this is where things start to come together. It's not that the Coco meet up with their lovers and die as some weird mating ritual, it's that when the Coco get to where the Chaos creatures that originally housed them as part of their heart or soul, when they get to the point in time where they died, the Coco die. These are not living, breathing beings. These are ghosts of a memory, basically reawakened here because of Eggman's interference with cyberspace. Now that you've messed around with cyberspace and started awakening all of the stuff on the island, the Coco, just like how cyberspace is made up of Sonic's memories, are walking amalgamations of the memories of their past lives. And they are living out their past lives up until the end. This is where the Coco turn from cute and cuddly creatures meant to replace the Chow to, no, these are just the ancestors to the Chow. And we're not getting to meet them, we're getting to lay them to rest. We are finding long, disparate memories of an ancient civilization and burying it. The entirety of our adventure on the Starfall Islands is the final death-rattling gasp of a long-dead people. We are, quite literally, whether we are in cyberspace or on Kronos Island proper, only running through a memory. This slow moment gets cut away by the next bit of important information, which is Sage showing off some of her humanity to Eggman, telling jokes with him. All the jokes involving various ways to violently beat up Sonic, but, you know, telling jokes to him nonetheless. We get to see an Eggman that is jovial, for evil reasons, mind you, but his daughter, his creation, is making him laugh. I should go ahead and take a quick aside to note this is not the first time we've had an Eggman's daughter storyline told by these writers. Of course, the writer for this game, the main one, is Ian Flynn, who writes the IDW comics, or, you know, he's written a lot of them as head writer. This moment, though, this is Sage as Eggman's daughter, created by Eggman while he was Eggman. In the IDW comics, there was another daughter of his named Belle, created when he was under the effects of amnesia and when he was dubbing himself Mr. Tinker. We get to see the two ways that he constructs his people, his constructs, his children. When he's Mr. Tinker, he creates her of wood and makes her a very handy person. She's a helper. She can fix doors and bathtubs and anything you could think about in a village. Whereas Sage is an AI construct meant to be purely utilitarian. She serves a single purpose, and, I mean, she gets to be more thanks to the Ancient's tech, but it really does go to show the type of thing Eggman creates depending on which persona he's flipped into. And it is interesting seeing that, as opposed to treating Sage like a tool, he's slowly starting to see her more as human. We, of course, get this if we fish up all of the Eggman's memos during Big's fishing, but this is where we get to see it in actual animated form. And it's nice. I'm not gonna lie, I like this stuff. I like Eggman and Sage. Egg Dad is best dad. Can we please get more Egg Dad in future games? I like him. We also get a scene where Sage is starting to come to terms with the fact that Eggman is a bit of a weirdly multifaceted character. He speaks of Sonic with respect as often as he speaks of him as a tiny thorn in his side, and Eggman notes that he respects Sonic. He has a genuine admiration for his ability. The only problem is that he's opposed to him, so he hates him. Like, that's the long and short of it. Eggman doesn't find himself always superior to Sonic in every way and shape and form, he also finds Sonic to be incredibly impressive in his own right. Why do you think one of his most prized creations is Metal Sonic? The way he admires Sonic as a character in this narrative makes the way that Eggman treats Metal Sonic in the IDW comics make a lot more sense. Metal Sonic is his idealized Sonic. He is all of Sonic's abilities, but on his side as opposed to against him. It's a real twisted way to show your respect for someone, but you know, they do say that imitation is the most sincere form of flattery. However, we get to find out that Knuckles does not have an army of dead Coco quite yet. There are a few who have met their end at the place we saw them die earlier, but he still has some in his army. While playing the role of commander, he comes across this. A bit of architecture that reminds him of Angel Island, and specifically reminds him of his first meeting with Sonic and Tails. Because the bunker reminds Knuckles so much of the first time he met Sonic and Tails, he goes on about how he can't lose this as an army of the boss enemies that we've been fighting up to this point start to show up to assault it. This is honestly a really heartfelt scene. I like this. I like seeing Knuckles when he's not just a meathead. I like seeing him emotional. I like seeing him care. But of course, this is the moment where all of the Coco that Knuckles has been piloting up to this point finally kick the bucket. And honestly, it's like with Amy. The game allows us to just feel this scene. We get to just breathe here. Sonic sits down and tries to comfort Knuckles with some words, but he realizes there's nothing he can say that can alleviate what he's feeling right now. We get to see a Sonic who is quite literally at a loss for words. And this is where we get Knuckles telling Sonic that he does admire the fact that he's able to go wherever he wants, unlike Knuckles. But Sonic points out that, you know, Knuckles has had plenty of times where he's able to leave Angel Island and he could just do it whenever he wants. This puts Knuckles on the path of trying to be something other than just the guardian of the Master Emerald. He's still obviously going to try to make sure that it's safe, but he needs to go out and experience the world in something other than just an adventure to stop the world from being destroyed or trying to sniff out the Master Emerald pieces from wherever they've happened to fall in Adventure 1, 2, or disparate fan fictions across the internet on AO3. He needs to go be his own person instead of just being an isolationist with friends that are always on speed dial thousands of miles away. And Sage in the background gives us this ominous bit about them being doomed no matter what they do. That's not super important until later, but yeah, apparently she's been running simulations this entire time, and she has come to the conclusion that everybody is gonna die. We do get confirmation from Sage that none of the characters are actually at any risk right now. They are currently stable and hovering between cyberspace and reality. Currently. She did say that everybody is doomed, so, I mean, they're currently stable. That will not matter when the entire world goes explode. But again, that's for later. What matters now is that Sonic has all but one Chaos Emerald, and it's time to go ahead and have our rematch with the Wyvern. After having another really amazing boss fight with it. Seriously, this thing is awesome! But after having this boss fight with the Wyvern, we then cut to something we saw at the end of the Giganto fight, but not really in any major way. We get to see a little bit of a tiny breath of a snippet of the ancient civilization having their last moments, we think. Basically, it looks like they're piloting mechs, and that's it. There's no real information given at this point. This will all come to fruition later, but for now, these are tiny puzzle pieces we'll put together at a different point. For now, you know the drill. We are not going to be able to save Knuckles at this point. We have to go to the third island and save Tails. Now, you remember how I said that when we saved Amy, Sonic got a little bit of cyber corruption? Yeah, that cyber corruption increased a little bit more when he saved Knuckles, but really, after saving Tails, this is when that corruption starts to take over a lot of his body. I'm getting some really heavy metal virus vibes from this. Sonic is not looking so good, and even when he's out in the open world, you can see that his condition is not great. If he's not in motion, he looks tired. Dude looks like he's gone through the ringer. This is a really nice touch. I like this. And oh, goody. Sage actually says that this is called cyber corruption, so everything fits. This is good. This is happy. But also, we get some of the first bits of hearing the actress behind Sage really show her emotional range. It's very, very subtle, but the way she delivers this line when she says that it's so bad that someone so impressive is going to die, the way she says it's not fair here, it pulls at my heartstrings. I don't know what it is, but the line delivery here, it hurts to listen to, and in a good way. The next bit, though, is Sonic encountering another Titan, the final Titan that we know about right now. This one is the Knight. Sage confronts Sonic and asks him what he will do, and Sonic confirms that he's just gonna go do what he's always done. And look, I can even tell you with 100% guarantee now, the squid is a friend. He helps us in the fight against... Oh no, he's gone. I miss him already. But at least Sage is acting more friendly towards us now. Tails also gets to confirm a lot of the suspicions we've had about cyberspace, since he's the only one that really understands the kind of technobabble that goes into this kind of stuff. We also get to take a look at the apocalypse that ended up destroying all of the ancients here. Looks like they weren't super successful in defending their civilization from whatever it was that took them out. Whereas Amy and Knuckles have some very heartfelt moments in their stories, it's Tails who actually spends a lot of time really analyzing these areas and explaining to the player, like, hey, these cannons were used for defense, these things were used for that, this technology does this, and honestly, I do appreciate it. I'm glad that the game didn't spoon-feed us this information as we were going through, until a character who would appropriately be able to analyze this kind of technology would actually, be able to tell us about it. And because it happens much later in the story, it gives us time to just kind of experience and theorize a lot about these areas, up until the point where Tails explains, like, hey, I'm pretty sure that they have this area here near this volcano as a staging position for military stuff. Like, it's just kind of nice. And Sonic actually does note to Tails that when he does find a Coco, it's not so much that we're dishonestly leading them to their deaths or anything. They just want peace. Like, these guys, they've been dead for a while. They want to stay peaceful and sleeping, and it's not exactly cruel to just let these little cute adorable dorks die. It's nature taking its course. I'm still worried about these guys. I'm sorry, I just see the Coco like Chow, and I don't want to think about them dying, but they're already technically dead, so there's nothing to really worry about, right? We're not really killing these little guys. We then get a scene where Tails interacts with Sage for the first time, and Sage gets to sit down and actually talk with somebody about Sonic other than Eggman. This is nice because we get to see her trying to piece together the kind of person other people perceive Sonic to be. We know later in the story this is necessary because she is running simulations all the time, and part of running those simulations is putting together a complete idea of not only what Sonic is, but who he is. This has definitely helped when Tails notes that he's not just got his feelings about Sonic, he's got data to back up that Sonic can pull through impossible odds, and he'll do anything to help and save his friends. This is apparently enough information for her to go back to Eggman and say that she does have a scenario that will successfully get Eggman out of cyberspace, potentially without him just up and dying. This is weird to me, though. I have to make a note of this. So, throughout the entirety of the story, she is making note every single time to let us know that Sonic is doomed, Tails is doomed, Knuckles is going to die, Amy is going to go kersplat, and the only way to keep everybody alive is by trapping them in cyberspace, which isn't really a safe place, because if the entire world is destroyed, then you would think that the Ancients' technology would go with it. I mean, it would be collateral damage in all of the destruction, so people wouldn't really be safe in cyberspace when the servers that are hosting their bodies are being destroyed. This is a weird plot point for me. But regardless, She does tell Eggman that there is a way that she can save him now, but it will probably involve things he's not super fond of. This causes Eggman to throw a temper tantrum despite, like Sage correctly points out, he's teamed up with Sonic to fight Neo-Metal. He's teamed up with Sonic to fight the Bio-Lizard on the Space Colony arc. He has teamed up with Sonic in a variety of times. Technically, this is a story that I think probably takes place after several instances in the IDW comics, like, say, the Metal Virus, which means he's also teamed up with Sonic to save the world then. Eggman has teamed up with Sonic a lot of times. It's almost as if he should be used to that by now, but this one instance he gets to pretend he's Vegeta in the Dragon Ball Super Broly movie, and he's just not having it. I don't know. It's both a perfect characterization of Eggman for him not to want to do it right now, but it's also a bit inconsistent with the amount of times he has successfully done it by now. We also get Eggman versus the army of gun robots and helicopters, which, you know, lasts for all of 2 seconds before Sage just yeets them all out of existence. This is one of the thousands of scenarios we're supposed to imagine have happened up to this point that are slowly causing him to reconsider Sage's place as an AI and more of, you know, a person, a daughter. A person who's exceeded her function and impressed him more as a person and less like a tool. But snap back to Tails, we get Tails having an external midlife crisis. Now, Tails is trying to figure out what kind of a person he actually is. This is an interesting thing. I'm going to take a moment to say that Tails having this crisis right now, this is good writing on top of bad writing. This is good writing having to exist on the foundation of bad writing. Tails has a bit of a tantrum here, saying that even when Sonic brings up a bunch of good points about the things he's done to save the world, ultimately it means nothing because it just means that he's a wildly inconsistent person and needs to mature. This is true, and it makes sense within series canon, because if we take a look at all the instances where Tails has had to operate without Sonic, we have his moment in Station Square where he squares up to Eggman and he wins. We have his moment where he avenges what he thought was the death of Sonic in Adventure 2 and ends up coming out on top of Eggman then. But then we have moments like the Chaos Zero moment in Sonic Forces where he cowers in fear despite having destroyed the anus cavity of Chaos 4 in Sonic Adventure. He is pointing out that he, as a character, is wildly inconsistent. Sometimes he's a coward, like in Unleashed, and sometimes he's brave enough to stand up to world-ending apocalyptic scenarios. It really just depends on who's writing him at the time. Ultimately, I am happy that this is an aspect of his character that is getting addressed, because Tails has been in need of a course correction for a long time. The petty Tails who is shown to us in Sonic Lost World doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me when juxtaposed to the Tails we get in Adventure 1, 2, and 06. And of course, the saga of the Cocos concludes here with you getting everything that these Cocos need, and the Coco dying in front of Tails, and Sonic being proud of Tails for being able to stomach what he just went through. And now we get this scene. This is where Tails comes to the realization that he needs to relive his Adventure 1 and 2 arc and actually go be his own person that can define himself outside of just being Sonic's friend. But this conversation between the two of them, this is a very cathartic moment for fans of the Sonic series. Being able to see Tails become something other than Sonic's player 2 is a really, really good defining moment for his character, and I want to see what goes on with this. But I'm also more interested in what happens here with Sage. This is the first moment in this game that genuinely brought a tear to my eyes. Seeing Sage, who has not been alive that long and has only known what was in the beginning the cruelty of Eggman, that slowly morphed into him becoming, again, a really loving, doting father, she has not experienced true friendship. And her sitting here listening to Sonic and Tails on the other side of this pillar, it's really heartbreaking to see her with her mannerisms and her speech just kind of get really torn up about this. I'm just going to go ahead and quote what she says exactly here because I think it's super poignant. Such a beautiful friendship, a family born of love and not genetics. It's everything I want. I wish I'd never seen this. It was so much easier accepting the future when they were simply enemies. Sage starts to cry, and then we get something interesting. We see all of the scenes that have shown Sage develop with Eggman, and this scene's a little weird to me. It's a musical number, and I don't hate it, but by the time I saw this scene, I had listened to all the Eggman logs. I knew how Eggman felt about Sage. I knew that he saw her as a person. And with this scene right here, I'm seeing all of the different aspects of humanity slowly being introduced to Sage. She knows what friendship is. She knows she wants it. She knows she wants a family born of love, which that's gonna be important later. Trust me! She wants all these things. She wants to be a whole person. So the scenes we see here with this music, this works if you have listened to all the Eggman audio logs. If you haven't, this scene makes no sense. This scene comes out of nowhere and is laughable. And it's amazing to me how much the context of those Eggman audio logs changed this moment in the story for me. We also get to see Sage slowly flicker between a light and a dark mode, almost as if when she starts getting feelings for Sonic, not in that way, DeviantArt already has you covered, she flickers to a whitish blue, whereas when she is thinking more of her dad, Eggman, she flickers to the usual red and black. But after this, Sonic and Tails have accumulated 6 Chaos Emeralds, so it's time to have our rematch with the Knight. Another incredibly amazing supersonic boss fight ensues, and then we get to come to the next part of the story. Yet another scene where we see one of the Ancients in their last moments in a mech with not a lot of context, and then a bunch of towers fire themselves back up on Kronos Island? This is a bit interesting. A bit weird, but it does mean that we're going back to Kronos. Now, I don't like that the game treats this as the 4th island, because it's not the 4th island. This is just Island 1.1. And then, of course, we're going to go to Island 1.2 after that. I don't mind returning to Kronos Island. I just wish the game wasn't lying to me, because this was, you know, something that was obviously done late in development when the budget ran out. Sonic is told to silence the 6 towers, and that will tear down the wall between dimensions and save his friends. But of course, Sonic is slowly running out of energy. He's experiencing cyber corruption, and he's also gone into supersonic mode 3 times in what's probably only a handful of days. He's not looking too hot. But as he interacts with each of these towers, he gets a flood of memories downloaded into his brain the same way that the map is downloaded, where he gets to see more and more about the ancient civilization, how they utilized the Chaos Emeralds, why they utilized the Chaos Emeralds, and how they managed to get themselves to this planet. Sonic gets to witness the destruction of the Ancients' home planet. All the while, the cyber corruption is slowly eating him. Sage, trying to gather more data and now genuinely concerned about Sonic, keeps on asking him, "Hey, how are you doing? Are you okay? How are you able to keep on pushing on? What makes you tick?" Sonic sees the Ancients make their way to Earth, and then he gets to see an exposition dump, basically. It's a teacher talking with a bunch of students, and as a result, we get a lot of information fed to us at once as the students are being educated. He's telling them about the Chaos Emeralds, their hopes and dreams and memories, how cyberspace works, why they're on Earth, what they had to flee, and then he's told that he's needed elsewhere. Something terrible has happened. The thing that destroyed their planet is currently on its way to destroy this one. All the while, Sonic is getting even more corrupted. Sage confronts him, saying that she thinks she understands him now, both of them will do anything to protect those who are precious to them. Her because she was programmed to with Eggman, and Sonic because of his genuine love for his friends. As Sonic is on his last legs, he gets to see the Chaos Emeralds empowering the Titans that are going to be used to fight the end. And hopefully this is where things will start to click together for you, that maybe killing the things that were used to defend the planet from the destruction of everything was not a smart idea. This was not a good plan. Listening to evil voices in the sky does not save the world. It probably, in fact, dooms it. And now we get to get the context for what happened with all of those disparate moments after each and every Titan fight. We get to see the final stand against whatever it was that destroyed the planet that the Ancients originally inhabited. We get to see various Ancients piloting all of the Titans, and now there are 4 of them instead of 3, so I guess the voice was lying to us. There was a 4th Titan all along. The Titan looks like Giganto, but with a gun, but, you know, that doesn't matter too much. They note that they can't beat this thing. They didn't have the technology to beat it when it destroyed their planet. They don't have the technology to beat it now. But they might have the technology to contain it. They might not be able to stop it from destroying the world, but they might be able to isolate its destruction to something a little more local. And basically, they take the choice of either letting themselves die or letting the world die, and in the end they decide that the world they call home needs to be able to survive. So one of the Titans is used to imbibe the entire essence of what we now know is called the End, and then makes its way down to Earth. And then the apocalypse that we've seen already happen on Chaos Island, it concludes. It happens. The Ancients all die, leaving only their memories. And honestly, this raises a lot of questions. I understand that this is a heartfelt moment in the story. We get to see this past civilization and what happened to them, but this also begs a question. All the Ancients die here, but their memories are still alive in the Coco, who are shut down until they are reawakened because of Eggman, at least as far as we can tell. Then who is Chaos, and who are the Chow, and how do they exist? Is it that the Ancients that lived on this island all went extinct, but some of them managed to go to other areas of the world, and they are what we know as the Chow now? And is there some reason that cyberspace is necessary for them to maintain their forms? I don't know. The actual progression that led to us having Chow and Chaos as we know him from these Ancients, it's not really well explained. And that's okay. They don't have to be well explained at this point. This is very new information for all of us. This is the first time we get to find out that the Chaos Emeralds were brought from another planet before it was destroyed. We don't know how they were manufactured there, but we know that things like the Master Emerald are completely and totally based on the planet that Knuckles and Sonic are from, so we know that there are just gems of power that happen to be located on multiple planets. The Chaos Emeralds were on the planet of the Ancients, and Master Emerald and things like the Warp Topaz existed on this one. And it's at this point that Sonic finally succumbs to the cyber corruption, basically dying. Every character manages to get out of cyberspace at this point. They're all safe now. Eggman is safe now, but it's at the cost of Sonic. He's gone. Eggman's gotten what he's wanted for years. This is Sonic's final moment. This isn't the first time Sonic has died or been considered dead by the cast in the story. This has happened several times. It's happened in Adventure 2. It's happened in Sonic Forces. It happened in 06 when Mephiles decided to penetrate him. Tails explains this as Sonic being stuck between realities, but this is not the same thing that they experienced. I'm sorry. This moment right here, Tails and Knuckles and Amy being stuck between realities, that was one thing. They got to interact, they got to live, they got to breathe, they got to be people still. This is not that. I know that Tails says Sonic is stuck between realities here. I'm gonna be honest. I feel like this is closer to being dead inside, like being dead inside your body, but your body still being alive. This is not the same thing as what they all experienced. It may be pertaining to it because it is still cyberspace oriented, but no, this scene is treated with the gravitas of Sonic is dead, guys. Even Eggman is completely and totally fine with this. And of course, without Sonic here, the only scenario that can keep Eggman alive cannot happen. So Sage just wants to shove Eggman back into cyberspace. And now we get to hear the end actually be honest for once. Since time immemorial, she's languished here. The locks are broken now. She'll tear down the walls between dimensions and consume everything. We have no motivation for this villain in the sky. We have no idea why they are doing this. We just know that they do it. Eggman says he'll mobilize the Egg Fleet in order to stop it, but Sage points out, no, that's not going to matter. Eggman's tech is not up to snuff compared to what the Ancients had, and his tech is definitely not going to be able to beat the end here. They couldn't do it with their Titans. He's not going to be able to do it with his ships. And now the story does something I'm not a fan of. All three characters link their hands around Sonic, and through the power of friendship, bring him back to life by sacrificing themselves and going back to cyberspace. I do not like this. I understand we can't keep a character like Sonic dead. We can't do that. No time have we kept Sonic dead in the story. In Adventure 2, he got out because of Deus Ex Machina Chaos Control. In 06, he got out because of Deus Ex Machina. We can revive people with Chaos Emeralds and Kisses now. In Sonic Forces, him being dead was a lie. He was being tortured for 6 months. Like, I understand we can't have Sonic be dead, but in Forces, the problem was that it didn't feel like Sonic was gone. In Adventure 2, it felt like Sonic was gone. We get to see Tails have his grief. We get to have his encounter with Eggman afterwards. And every character except Knuckles gets to believe that Sonic is truly dead, to the point where we don't see what happens with the other characters until he radios Tails and says, hey, I'm still alive, you did a good job. But every character treats Sonic as gone up to this point. In 06, though, this is handled way better, in my opinion. This is handled the best it can be. Sonic is killed by Mephiles, and in order to get the tools to get him back, you have to play as all of the other characters to get the Chaos Emeralds to keep Sonic from staying dead. You have to do work to revive him. Here, though, it's handled in a single scene where all the characters hold hands and bring Sonic back from the brink. This, to me, feels a little bit like a moment in Shantae, where in Shantae Half Genie Hero, all of her friends come and save her from turning into Dark Shantae forever. But what you don't see is that in the DLC, they had to go into Shantae's mind and actually, like, go through a shit ton of challenges to get their friend back. It's not handled well in the main story, but the DLC patches it up. I really hope that we get something like that in Frontiers, because Sonic's friends hold hands around him and then he is suddenly better again. This kind of strips all of the weight from this scene for me. Even if you want to say, well, actually, he's just trapped in cyberspace, this scene doesn't have the weight that you think it does. No, I don't care. This is treated very much as Sonic is gone, he is forever finished, the world is going to end, and then everybody solves it with the power of friendship literally instantaneously. I don't like this. I want to like this scene because everything leading up to this is handled so well, but the payoff is just awful. Sage begs with Eggman one more time to reconsider partnering up with Sonic, and Sonic, having nobody else to rely on at this point and having dealt with Eggman for so many other times, just smirks at him. I like this. I also really like Eggman inducting Sonic into the Eggman Empire temporarily. This is a throwback to something that happened in Super Mario RPG, where Bowser had to bring Mario into the Koopa army in order to justify having him help him throughout the journey. I like when this kind of justification is used. It's great. And of course, we get to see Sage bouncing and doing this flicker thing that she's been doing this whole time, showing that she is more and more getting closer to the idea of allying with Sonic as opposed to just allying with Eggman. And now we get a lot of interactions between Sonic and Sage again. I'm gonna be honest, at this point of the story, I kind of wish that we had had some interactions between Sonic and Eggman. Like, I would have really liked if all of these moments where we have Sonic talking with Sage leading up to what will be the final fight here, if these moments could have just been Sonic and Eggman chatting with Sage there just basically rooting on her dad, I would have loved that. I like Sonic and Eggman banter, and I wish we would have gotten more here. What we have here is fine, but what I want here is Eggdad being Eggdad more often. Sage also gets confirmation from Sonic that Eggman does in fact care about her. Sonic's known Eggman for a long time. He knows when he cares about something. He has seen the way that Eggman treats Metal Sonic. We also get some weird explanations for why there's no actual markers of a civilization here as opposed to just, random ruins everywhere. Sage notes that this is because the ancients had a hard time adjusting to the world, but I'm going to be honest, I feel like most of this came down to budgetary restrictions. I think we would have seen more ruins of civilization as opposed to ruins of temple had we actually had more time with this game. Maybe an actual 4th or 5th island could have been what was considered the residential zones, like Tails had noted. That's a more headcanon-y theory than anything, but I don't know. It's at this point that it feels like the devs knew that they didn't have the time and money to complete this, because that's what happens with all Sonic games, and this bit was put in so that they could kind of patch that up narratively. I could be wrong, but I've also played a lot of Sonic, and I might not be. This is also where Sonic confirms that all of the places in cyberspace he's been in have been pulled from his memories. The island was literally importing data from his memories and applied it to his surroundings so that he would be able to comprehend what was going on. And Sonic deems that this probably gave him the edge he needed to get out. If he was already familiar with all those locations, then that would explain why he's able to get out of them as much as he is. Again, I don't like the cyberspace levels from a gameplay perspective, but honestly, from a narrative perspective, I like these things a lot. They're really fantastic. We also find out that the Coco originated as Lucky Charms for the ancients, and eventually they were used to store the data of their memories after they died. The Coco weren't originally meant to be this, but eventually they did become practically the ghosts of their creators. We also get to find out that the ancients followed a sort of religion, which would explain all of the religious temple structures that are everywhere. So whereas Tails gives us the outside analysis of everything the ancients were doing, Sage, having interacted with everything in cyberspace, gets to give us the nitty-gritty of the story now. This is also where we get the confirmation from Sage that the scope of her abilities and even her as a person has been modified because of her interacting with cyberspace. The base code was made by Eggman, but her as a person, as a thinking, breathing being, that came into existence because of cyberspace. These are things we could only theorize about earlier in the video, but now that we're here, well, there you go. We find out that while we have been looking for all the Chaos Emeralds, Eggman has been looking for just one Chaos Emerald, but he does deliver it at the last second to Sonic and has as close to a bit of camaraderie as he possibly can, just letting him know, hey, don't screw this up. And this is where we get to see Sage just being cute. I like Sage. I don't care how other people feel about this character. I think she's adorable. She is amazing, and I want more of Sage in future games. Assuming she survives the plot of this one. A very glitchy battle with the final Titan happens, and as cool as it is, it's just as cool as the other fights. It's neat. We get to beat it, and instead of destroying the Titan this time, we merely subdue it, and the essence that was trapped in it that we saw get trapped in an earlier cutscene is now gone. The end has escaped, and now it is in space. And this is where one of my favorite scenes in this game happens, because I like the slow stuff. I like when this game breathes and lets its characters feel things. Sage lets Eggman know that she is going to have to pilot that mech now. The reason that we have not been able to pilot them before is because each of them had some amount, some essence, something that was keeping them from being fully integrated and interfaced with. But now that we've knocked everything out of this one and it's only a shell, Sage can pilot it. She notes that she's going to have to pilot it and help Supersonic because they can't kill it individually. They can't stop the end from destroying their world. And we get a very, very good performance from Mike Pollock where he very barely can tell her to go fulfill her function.
I understand. Go. Fulfill your function.
Which, as far as he's concerned, is sending her off to a death sentence. We get the Undertale fight with the end here, and it gives us the equivalent to the monologue that every shonen villain has ever given a main character ever in the history of ever. I don't like this part. I would have liked if some kind of motivations were given, something to make this enemy make sense to us, but honestly, at the end of the day, I think I can safely say Sonic Frontiers doesn't have a villain. Oh, it has an antagonist at the end. It has a thing that has to be killed at the end, but it has no villain because this is not a villain. This is a caricature of every bad shonen evil guy trope wrapped into one. If you've seen Gurren Lagann, you've seen this. If you've seen Dragon Ball, you've seen this. Every single quote you could think about. I am the end. I am inevitable. I am infinite. I am the roughest of mountains. I am the tallest of waves. It's all here. It's all really underwhelming. In the finale, Sonic ends up trying to destroy the End's physical manifestation and fails, which means now we need to have Sage try. And this is where Sage pulls a Shadow the Hedgehog, sacrifices herself, and is gone, noting to Sonic only to look after her dad. Look after the person who brought her into this world, who at first she was only programmed to protect, but now legitimately loves. All she wanted was a family born of love. She wanted to impress her dad. And now she's going to have to go. This is where I think the narrative does something that I really like. Sonic makes his way back down to Earth and pops out of supersonic form, scattering the emeralds properly this time across the world, and gets to have his happy reunion with his friends. He doesn't know, or at least we are not given any information to note whether he knows that Sage is gone. You see, in Sonic Adventure 2, he saw Shadow plummet to Earth, but here we get no confirmation from Sonic if he knows that Sage is gone or not. He just knows that Sage rammed the Supreme Titan into the final boss. It could either be that he doesn't know that Sage is gone, or he recognizes that she's gone, but the elation of being able to see his friends again is more important to him than anything else. Either way, we don't get anything from Sonic except elation, and when we flip back to Eggman, oh boy, this scene, this is how you do this. No words, just a faraway shot of Eggman and only his body language to communicate how he feels. We get to see the reaction of shock, the disbelief. We get to see the defeat as he realizes that his daughter, she's gone. And then something really interesting happens. The last thing we see here is Eggman's determination. We see that he's not going to let this be the end, despite, the name of the boss being that. The credits roll, and we get our mid-credit cutscene of Sonic, Tails, Amy, and Knuckles all letting each other know that they're going to go on their own separate adventures. Tails is going to go be his own person. Amy's going to go try to share her love with the world instead of just hyper-focusing on Sonic. Knuckles is going to try to go be something other than a guardian. And Sonic, he's just happy to see all of his friends alive, healthy, and ready to go on their own adventures and do their own things. I don't know how I feel about this part here. I like that the other characters are going, but I don't know how I feel about Sonic not acknowledging Sage at all at this moment. I also feel like maybe some kind of interaction with Eggman would have made sense here, but that's not super important. What's important is we're going to flip back to Eggman, and it's at this point that he is very, very hard at work doing the stereotypical hacker thing, and he is making damn sure about something. And we get confirmation of that when he gets the same symbol that has appeared above the Ancients' technology throughout the entire game. We still don't know what it means. We get to see that symbol on his computer screen and Sage's voice say, "Father." Eggman acknowledges that, yes, this is his daughter. He acknowledged it before the end, and he's acknowledging it now. We have Sage again. We don't know what's going to happen with Sage in future games, but we know that she is not necessarily gone. And now, I want to do some speculation on this, but I think that's going to be better for other videos. I have some thoughts on what can be done with Sage and what can be done with Eggman, specifically as a character, from this point on. But again, those are for other videos. We're at 2 hours and 20 minutes. I am borderline just violating the Geneva Convention with the amount of editing that Pup is going to have to do to this. So again, sorry about all that. But now I guess this is where I have to get to my conclusions. I'm going to be honest, this story to me is a 9 out of 10. There's a couple of plot threads that I think could have been, handled a bit better, but that feels like time constraint stuff. I am very happy with what this story is. This game as a complete package, the controls are better than I would have expected, but not as good as they could have been. The cyberspace levels infuriate the crap out of me. The world structure is great, if not a little unpolished and unfinished. And with a fantastic story here, I have a very hard time figuring out exactly what I would call this game. As a Sonic fan, I think this was a fantastic experience. This was what I've been waiting for so long. This kind of storytelling, this kind of, different style of gameplay. This is great. This is awesome. There's a lot of stuff I wish they could have done with this game, though. I wish we could have gotten to play with the other characters. Imagine playing as Tails and Knuckles in this giant open world. Imagine using Amy's hammer to parkour around the mountains. This is a great place to have other characters with different movement options, but we don't have any of that. I know it's for plot-specific reasons, but still, speaking of that plot, dear God, this story would be a 10 out of 10 for me if there was some weight to the cyber corruption story. So much buildup and almost no payoff, but I still end up enjoying this. I still love this story in the end there. I like what we have here. It's been said that this game is going to be the foundation for what Sonic games are going to be in the future. And if that's the case, I'm honestly excited. I'm normally trepidatious. I feel like, Sonic Team's going to burn me for the umpteenth time, but now I really feel like we've got something solid here. I just hope that we actually do something with it. After Generations, we got Lost World and Forces. I'm hoping after Frontiers, we take this foundation and polish it to a mirror shine. I'm going to be honest, this is probably the best time to finally have a Sonic Adventure 3. I know that technically 06 was already that, but think about it. This open world is like everything the hub of Adventure 1 wanted to be. Jumping to the different levels in cyberspace is exactly like going to the different levels of Adventure 1, and this game handles a linear narrative very, very well, despite being an open game, meaning we can have the same well-crafted stories we had in the Adventure era, but again here. And there's so many parallels here. Think about it. We have all of the characters from Adventure 1 except Gamma, because of course he's kind of dead. They're all here. I'm of the opinion that Big the Cat here is more a manifestation of Sonic's memories and less actually Big the Cat, but that's a theory for a different video. We have all the pieces here from Adventure 1. The focus on Chaos as a character. The focus on Sonic, Tails, Amy, Knuckles. Eggman as a villain that has to get usurped at the end by a giant big bad. Like, literally, everything here is just the stuff we had in Adventure, but bigger and with current technology. This is the perfect time. This is the perfect formula to finally give us a true Adventure 3 in name, feel, scope, and narrative. I like Sonic Frontiers. I think this is one of my favorite Sonic games now. I hope that's not just recency bias talking, but I really like this game. But I'm more excited for what's coming in the future. This video has been obnoxiously long. Holy shit. So, you know, I'm just going to say thank you for sticking through the entirety of this. This was a huge undertaking, both in getting everything prepared for this video itself, and this is, again, a collaborative effort. This is not just a me video. This is also a Channel Pup video. He's going to be the one editing this, so if you can do me a huge favor, please, if you've made it this far, the least you can do is go to the link that's going to be down in the description, and please go check out his channel. He does a fantastic job with the work he does on his own channel, whether it's talking about superhero stuff or whether it's talking about Sonic stuff. He does a damn good job, and honestly, there's a reason that I've had him doing this edit and the What If Shadow Died edit. It's not just because he's a friend who's offering to do it. It's also because he's just good at that. There, I'm done gushing about him. He's gonna see this in the edit. He's either gonna cut this part out or he's not. I don't know. I don't care. That's not a me issue. That's a him issue. Anyways, please go check out his channel. Subscribe to him if you haven't already. Subscribe to me if you haven't already. Check out either of our Patreons. Support our work. That'd be great. If you haven't checked out Sunset City yet, where we do work with Wayne and Nick and others over there, please do that. Those are all things you can do. There are feature-length films that are shorter than this review. You're still here. What are you doing? Go get a life. Go get friends. Go do something. But thank you for watching. Please hit the like button. Anyway, insert end of video tagline here. There are feature